I stood at the altar in my grandmother's lace dress, altered to fit my smaller frame, feeling the weight of 200 judging eyes on my back. The church smelled of lilies and old wood, that particular scent of St. Michael's Cathedral that usually brought me comfort. Not today. Today, it smelled like my impending doom. "We need to pause the ceremony," Caroline Ashford announced, her voice cutting through the organ music like a knife through silk. She was my fiancé Robert's mother, a woman who wore her pearls like weapons, and her disdain for me like perfume. "Before my son makes the biggest mistake of his life." The organ stuttered to a stop. Father Michael looked confused, his wrinkled hands still holding the Bible open to the wedding verses. I felt Robert's hand slip from mine, and that small movement told me everything I needed to know. He wasn't going to defend me. He never had. "Mother, please," Robert said, but his voice lacked conviction. He stepped back, creating distance between us that felt like an ocean. Caroline walked down the aisle, her Chanel suit perfectly pressed, her blonde hair swept into that severe bun she always wore. Robert's sister Victoria followed, smirking, her bridesmaid dress swishing with each deliberate step. Then came his father, Thomas Ashford, whose construction empire had built half of Chicago's skyline. The holy trinity of my nightmare, assembled to destroy me on what should have been the happiest day of my life. "This woman," Caroline said, pointing at me like I was an exhibit in a courtroom, "has been lying to our family for 2 years. Grace Sullivan. Such a simple name. Almost too simple, don't you think?" My hands trembled. I clutched my bouquet of white roses so tightly that thorns pressed through my gloves, but the pain kept me grounded. I was a 28-year-old literature professor at Northwestern University. I had published papers on Homeric epics. I had a doctorate. I had dignity. But standing there in front of Chicago's elite, wearing a dress I'd saved for months to alter, I felt like nothing. "Grace teaches literature," Robert said weakly, as if that explained anything, defended anything. "Grace teaches literature at a public university," Victoria corrected, her voice dripping with condescension, "for a salary that barely covers her studio apartment in that questionable neighborhood. Tell me, Grace, what was the plan? Marry into money and never work another day in your life?" I opened my mouth, but no words came out. What could I say? That I loved Robert? That I thought he loved me? That I'd ignored every warning sign, every subtle insult, every time his family made me feel small because I believed love would be enough? "She grew up in foster care," Caroline announced to the assembled guests, her voice projecting to the back pews. "No family, no connections, no inheritance. She saw my son, saw the Ashford name, and decided to secure her future." Gasps rippled through the church. I saw my few friends from the university exchange horrified looks. My department chair, Professor Matthews, stood up as if to intervene, but his wife pulled him back down. Nobody was coming to save me. I was alone, as I'd always been alone. "That's not true," I finally whispered, but my voice was so small that only Robert heard me. He wouldn't meet my eyes. 2 years of acting," Caroline continued, pacing in front of the altar like a prosecutor delivering closing arguments. 2 years of playing the sweet, innocent girl, the bookish intellectual who just happened to stumble into our son's life. How convenient that you met at that charity gala where you were serving drinks. "I was invited as a speaker," I said, finding my voice. "I gave a lecture on Greek mythology and its influence on modern business metaphors. Your husband specifically requested me." Thomas Ashford stepped forward. "You were paid $200 for a 20-minute talk, hardly a speaking fee that suggests expertise. You saw an opportunity and took it." My vision blurred. I wouldn't cry. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction. But the tears came anyway, hot and humiliating, streaking down the makeup I'd carefully applied at 5 in the morning. "Robert, please." I turned to him, desperate now. Tell them about us, about our life together." He looked at me finally, and what I saw in his eyes broke something fundamental inside me. Pity. Not love. Not even anger. Just pity. And beneath it, relief. Relief that his family had given him an excuse to do what he'd wanted to do all along. "Grace, maybe we should have waited," he said softly. "Maybe we rushed things." "Rushed things?" My voice cracked. "We've been together for 2 years. You proposed to me. You chose this church. You chose today." At her insistence, Victoria chimed in, always pushing, always planning. She had a timeline, and she stuck to it. The church doors burst open with such force that they slammed against the stone walls, the sound echoing through the cathedral like thunder. Every head turned. The organ player jumped. Father Michael dropped his Bible. A man walked in, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 20 degrees. He was tall, over 6 feet, with dark hair that fell slightly across his forehead, despite obvious attempts to tame it. He wore a black suit that probably cost more than my annual salary, perfectly tailored to a body that suggested violence held barely in check. His face was striking in a way that made you forget to breathe. Sharp jawline, high cheekbones, full lips that looked like they rarely smiled. But it was his eyes that held me frozen. Dark, intense, burning with an emotion I couldn't name. He walked down the aisle with the confidence of a man who owned the world and knew it. Behind him came 4 other men, all in black suits, all radiating the kind of danger that made the society matrons clutch their pearls in actual fear instead of pretension. "Who are you?" Thomas Ashford demanded, his voice booming with practiced authority. "This is a private ceremony. Get out." The man ignored him completely. His eyes were locked on me, and I couldn't look away. I'd never seen him before in my life. I would have remembered. You don't forget a face like that, a presence like that. He stopped 3 feet from the altar, close enough that I could smell his cologne. Something dark and expensive, cedar and smoke. Close enough that I could see a small scar above his left eyebrow, a thin white line that only added to his dangerous beauty. "Grace Sullivan," he said, and his voice was like whiskey in midnight, smooth and dark and utterly compelling. "My apologies for the delay. Traffic in the city is murder this time of day." I stared at him, confused, terrified, and somehow relieved all at once. I don't know you." His lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Don't you? That's unfortunate, because I know everything about you. Your favorite coffee order, black with a single sugar, from that little shop on campus where the barista writes bad poetry on the cups. Your morning routine, you run at 6, always the same route through Millennium Park, even in winter. Your Thursday night ritual, Chinese takeout and grading papers while listening to recordings of ancient Greek being read aloud. The blood drained from my face. "How do you—" "The question isn't how I know," he interrupted gently. "The question is why you're standing at an altar with a man who just let his mother humiliate you in front of 200 witnesses instead of standing with me." "This is insane," Caroline sputtered. "Security! Someone call security!" The man turned to her, and whatever she saw in his face made her step back. "Mrs. Ashford, your construction company just secured a contract to renovate the Riverside development. Congratulations. Would be a shame if the permits were suddenly revoked due to unexpected complications." Thomas Ashford's face went red. "Are you threatening us?" "I'm stating facts." The man turned back to me, and his expression softened in a way that seemed impossible for someone so clearly dangerous. "Grace, you have a choice. You can stay here and finish this travesty of a ceremony, marry a man who won't defend you, and spend the rest of your life being treated like you're not good enough. Or you can leave with me. Why would she leave with you? Robert found his voice, finally showing some spine. She doesn't know you. This is kidnapping. It's only kidnapping if she doesn't want to come. Those dark eyes held mine. Do you want to come with me, Grace? I should have said no. I should have demanded answers. I should have called the police. Instead, I heard myself whisper, yes. He smiled then, really smiled, and it transformed his entire face. He looked younger, less dangerous, almost human. He took off his suit jacket and draped it around my shoulders. It smelled like him, and it was warm from his body. Then he scooped me up into his arms like I weighed nothing, holding me against his chest like I was something precious, something worth protecting. Wait, Caroline shrieked. You can't just... Everyone leave, he said, his voice cutting through her protests like a blade. Now! The 4 men behind him moved with practiced efficiency, herding the guests toward the doors. Nobody argued. Nobody fought. They just went, like sheep before wolves, and within 3 minutes the cathedral was empty except for Father Michael, who looked like he might faint. The riverside permits, Thomas Ashford called out desperately from the doorway. You can't... Already done. The man holding me didn't even turn around. Consider it a wedding gift, to myself. He carried me down the aisle, past the abandoned flowers, past the overturned programs, past the life I'd been trying to build. At the door, he paused and looked back at Robert, who stood frozen at the altar. If you ever come near her again, he said conversationally, I'll kill you. Not a threat, a promise. Then we were outside in the Chicago sunshine, and he was placing me gently into the back of a black Mercedes, sliding in beside me. The door closed with a solid, final sound. Who are you? I asked again, my voice shaking. He took my hand, his fingers warm and sure around mine. Dominic Sterling, and you, Grace Sullivan, are now under my protection, whether you like it or not. The Mercedes glided through Chicago's streets like a shark through water, silent, powerful, inevitable. I sat rigidly in the leather seat, acutely aware of Dominic Sterling's presence beside me. He hadn't let go of my hand, his thumb tracing absent patterns on my palm that should have been threatening, but somehow felt grounding. Where are we going? I finally asked, finding my voice somewhere between State Street and the river. My home, unless you'd prefer somewhere else. He said it like a question, but the car didn't slow down. I prefer answers. I pulled my hand away, clutching his jacket tighter around my shoulders. The silk lining was cool against my skin, a stark contrast to the heat flooding my cheeks. You just crashed my wedding, threatened Chicago's 3rd richest family, and carried me out of a church like some romance novel hero? He supplied, and there was amusement in his voice that made me irrationally angry. Criminal? I corrected sharply. You acted like a criminal, because that's what you are, aren't you? Dominic Sterling. I watched recognition dawn in his eyes, the realization that I'd placed his name, connected it to the whispers, the rumors, the occasional news story that got buried before it could gain traction. Dominic Sterling, who owned half the nightclubs in downtown Chicago. Dominic Sterling, whose name appeared in police reports that mysteriously vanished. Dominic Sterling, the man they called the King of the North Side, though never to his face. I prefer entrepreneur, he said mildly. I prefer not being kidnapped by the mob. It's not kidnapping if you agreed to come. And I'm not the mob. The mob is Italian. I'm Irish, Welsh, and disappointingly British on my mother's side. He shifted in his seat, turning to face me fully. And you're not scared of me, Grace. You're scared of what happened back there, of being humiliated, of your perfect life falling apart. My perfect life? I laughed, a harsh sound that surprised me. You clearly don't know anything about my life. I know that you work 60-hour weeks because you're terrified of being poor again. I know that you haven't taken a vacation in 3 years. I know that you kept dating Robert Ashford even after his mother made you cry at Christmas dinner, because you convinced yourself that love conquers all, and you could prove them wrong. His voice softened. I know that you're the strongest woman I've ever met, and you don't even realize it. The car pulled up to a building I recognized, the Sterling Tower, a gleaming monument of glass and steel on the waterfront. Of course he lived here. The penthouse probably had a view of the entire city, a throne room for a king. How long? I asked as the driver opened the door. How long have you been watching me? 6 months. He said it without shame, without apology. Since the day you saved my niece from those girls at your school. I froze, 1 foot out of the car. Sophia? Sophia Sterling is your niece? My brother's daughter. He died 2 years ago. Car accident, though the police report calls it suspicious. Dominic stepped out and offered his hand. I ignored it, climbing out myself, my grandmother's wedding dress catching on the doorframe. He reached down and carefully freed the lace without comment. Sophia never mentioned you. Sophia doesn't know I exist. My brother wanted it that way. Wanted her away from the family business, away from this life. We entered the lobby, and the security guards straightened like soldiers before their general. But I watch over her anyway. It's what family does. The elevator ride to the penthouse took 45 seconds. I counted each one, trying to process everything. Sophia Sterling, brilliant, sensitive 14-year-old Sophia, who wrote the most insightful essays on the Odyssey I'd ever read from a student her age. 3 months ago, I'd found her crying in the hallway, surrounded by popular girls who were mocking her clothes, her scholarship status, her dead father. I'd sent the bullies to detention and stayed with Sophia for an hour, talking about Telemachus and the courage it takes to stand alone. She came home different that day, Dominic said quietly, as if reading my thoughts. Lighter. She told her aunt about you, about how you made her feel seen, how you said that the greatest heroes in literature were the ones who chose kindness when cruelty would have been easier. The elevator doors opened directly into his penthouse. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed Chicago spread out like a kingdom below us. The space was masculine but not cold. Dark wood, leather furniture, bookshelves that surprised me. I saw first editions of Hemingway, Fitzgerald, even some ancient texts that looked genuinely old. You read Greek? I walked to the shelf, forgetting for a moment that I was in a mobster's apartment in my wedding dress. I studied classics at Oxford, before I dropped out to take over the family business. He moved to a bar cart, poured 2 fingers of amber liquid into crystal glasses. My father believed that men who control empires should understand how empires fall. The Iliad was required reading in our house. He handed me a glass. I took it, but didn't drink, watching him over the rim. Why did you really bring me here, Dominic? Because I couldn't watch you marry him. He said it simply, directly, those dark eyes holding mine with an intensity that made my breath catch. I've spent 6 months trying to talk myself out of this obsession, telling myself you were just a good person who helped my niece, that my interest was gratitude, nothing more, that you had your own life, your own choices, and I had no right to interfere. But you interfered anyway. I interfered when I saw Robert Ashford's mother humiliate you in front of half of Chicago's elite, and I watched your fiancé do nothing. I interfered when I realized that you were about to sacrifice yourself on the altar of belonging, of finally having a family, of not being alone anymore. I interfered because someone needed to, and nobody else would. I set down the glass, my hand shaking. You don't know me. 6 months of surveillance doesn't mean you know me. You're right. He moved closer, and I could see gold flecks in his dark eyes. I know your patterns, your routines, your favorite books. I know that you always take the long way home on Fridays because you pass by that Italian bakery, and the smell reminds you of a foster mother who was kind to you when you were 7. I know that you talk to yourself when you're grading papers, arguing with your students' logic. I know that you haven't been touched with genuine affection in so long that when Robert's mother criticized you at that Christmas dinner, you apologized to her. Stop. My voice cracked. I don't know how you take your tea, or what makes you laugh, or what you dream about when you're alone at night. I don't know if you prefer sunrise or sunset, or what songs make you cry. I don't know if you believe in God, or fate, or chaos. But I want to learn. I want to earn the right to know those things. By kidnapping me? By offering you a choice. He stepped back, giving me space. You can leave right now. I'll have my driver take you anywhere you want to go. Your apartment, a hotel, the airport if you want to leave Chicago entirely. I'll even give you a number where you can reach me if Robert or his family causes problems. And if I stay? If you stay, I'll give you the wedding that you deserved. Not the circus that was happening in that church, but something real. Something that protects you from ever being humiliated like that again. I stared at him. You want to actually marry me? A woman you've never had a conversation with until 20 minutes ago? I want to give you a choice that isn't between humiliation and loneliness. He pulled out his phone, showed me a screen. It was a legal document, already prepared, already notarized. A marriage contract. It's a business arrangement, Grace. You marry me, you get my name, my protection, and enough money that you'll never have to worry about security again. You continue teaching, living your life, pursuing your research. In return, I get companionship, someone who isn't afraid of me, someone who sees beyond the reputation. And love? I asked quietly. Isn't promised, but isn't forbidden either. He pocketed the phone. I've built an empire by betting on sure things, Grace. But this? You? This is the biggest gamble I've ever taken. Because I'm betting that 6 months from now, a year from now, you'll look at me and see something worth staying for. That this marriage of convenience becomes something real. I walked to the window, looked down at the city where I'd spent the last 5 years trying to build a life. I thought about my tiny studio apartment with its leaky faucet, my department chair who kept hinting about budget cuts, the loneliness that had driven me into Robert's arms, that had made me ignore every warning sign because being wanted felt better than being alone. Why me? I turned back to face him. Really? There are thousands of women in Chicago. Why obsess over a literature professor who caught some bullies? Dominic was quiet for a long moment. Then he walked to the bookshelf, pulled out a worn paperback. The Odyssey, in Greek, with notes in the margins in a young boy's handwriting. My brother gave this to me when I was 16, and he was 21. Right before I had to make my first kill for the family business. He told me that Odysseus was a hero, not because he won the war, but because he spent 10 years trying to get home to the woman he loved. That real power isn't violence. It's the strength to stay human when the world wants to make you a monster. He handed me the book, and I saw tears in his eyes that he didn't try to hide. I didn't listen. I became exactly what the world expected. But then I saw you, defending my brother's daughter with nothing but words and conviction, and I thought, maybe it's not too late. Maybe there's still a way home. I held the book like it was made of glass. The pages smelled of old paper and time. You're asking me to be your Penelope. I'm asking you to be yourself, and to let me prove that I can be more than what I am. I should have said no. Should have walked out, gone back to my safe, small life. But I was 28 years old, and I'd just been humiliated at the altar by people I'd tried so hard to please. I was tired of being small, of being scared, of apologizing for existing. 1 year, I heard myself say. We try this for 1 year. If it doesn't work, we get an annulment. No questions, no guilt. 1 year, Dominic agreed. And I want it in writing, about my career, my independence. I'm not giving up my life to be your trophy wife. Agreed. Anything else? I looked at him. This dangerous, beautiful man who had just upended my entire existence. Teach me Greek, the way your brother taught you. I want to understand the notes in that book. He smiled, and it was like watching the sun break through storm clouds. Deal. We shook hands, formal as strangers making a business arrangement. But his touch was warm, and his eyes were soft. And somewhere in my chest, something that had been frozen for a very long time began to thaw. Dominic's penthouse had a guest room that was larger than my entire apartment. He showed me to it with surprising gentleness, pointing out the attached bathroom, the walk-in closet already filled with clothes in exactly my size, the window that overlooked Navy Pier. You planned this, I said, running my hand along silk blouses I'd never be able to afford on my own. You actually thought I'd come with you. I hoped. He stood in the doorway, hands in his pockets, looking suddenly uncertain. It was jarring, seeing vulnerability in a man who commanded rooms with his presence. But I prepared for rejection. There's a second bedroom at the other end of the hall. We don't have to share space until you're ready. If you're ever ready. I turned to face him, still wearing my grandmother's wedding dress, still feeling the phantom weight of humiliation from the church. What happens now? Now you rest. Tonight we'll talk about the logistics, the marriage license, the ceremony, how we handle the press. Tomorrow you decide if you want to go back to teaching this semester or take time to adjust. The day after that, we start learning to be married. He paused. And somewhere in between, I'll teach you Greek, and you'll teach me how to be human again. You're already human, Dominic. Am I? He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. I'll have dinner sent up in an hour, unless you prefer to be alone. Alone is what I've always been. Maybe it's time to try something different. He left me then, closing the door softly behind him. I stood in the middle of the luxury bedroom, surrounded by clothes and comfort I'd never earned, married in name to a man I'd met 2 hours ago, and I started to laugh. Hysterical, broken laughter that turned into sobs I'd been holding back since Caroline Ashford had called me a gold digger in front of everyone I knew. I cried for the woman who'd altered her grandmother's dress instead of buying a new one, for the girl who'd grown up in foster care learning that love was always conditional, for every time I'd made myself smaller, quieter, more palatable, hoping someone would finally think I was enough. When the tears finally stopped, I took off the wedding dress carefully, hanging it in the closet next to designer gowns I didn't know how to wear. I showered in a bathroom with heated floors and a shower head the size of a dinner plate. I put on yoga pants and a Northwestern sweatshirt from the clothes Dominic had somehow acquired, and I felt more like myself than I had in months. There was a knock on the door precisely an hour later. I opened it to find Dominic, now in casual clothes, dark jeans and a black t-shirt that revealed tattoos I hadn't noticed before. Celtic knots wrapped around his right forearm, disappearing under the sleeve. Dinner, he said, gesturing to the dining room where the table was set for 2. Nothing fancy. I wasn't sure what you liked, so I ordered from 6 different restaurants. He wasn't joking. The table looked like a buffet: Italian, Chinese, Thai, Mexican, a burger and fries, sushi, enough food for a wedding reception, laid out on fine china. This is insane, I said, but I was smiling. This is what happens when a man who's used to hostile takeovers tries to plan a dinner date. He pulled out my chair. I may have overcompensated. We ate Thai curry and Italian breadsticks and argued about whether the Iliad glorified war or condemned it. He quoted passages in Greek, his pronunciation perfect, his memory extraordinary. I found myself relaxing, forgetting for moments at a time that I was having dinner with a criminal kingpin. "Tell me about your brother," I said when we were halfway through dessert, tiramisu from a restaurant I'd always wanted to try but couldn't afford. Dominic's expression shuddered. "That's heavy conversation for a first dinner." "We're married." We skipped the light conversation phase. He laughed, genuinely laughed, and the sound transformed him. "Fair point. Michael was. Everything I'm not. Kind, optimistic, believe the best in people. Our father groomed him to take over the legitimate businesses, while I handled the darker side. Michael hated what we did, what we were, but he understood it was necessary to keep the family safe. And then he died. Car accident. Official report says he lost control on a rainy night. Convenient, since he'd just testified in a closed-door federal investigation about police corruption. Dominic's jaw tightened. They made it look like an accident, but I know murder when I see it. I've arranged enough of them. I should have been horrified by that casual admission. Instead, I asked, "Did you get justice?" "I got revenge. Justice is for people who believe in the system. I am the system, in my corner of this city." He met my eyes. "Does that scare you? Knowing what I'm capable of?" "You want honesty?" I set down my fork. "Yes, it scares me. But you know what scares me more? Going back to that life where I apologized for existing, where I let people treat me like I was lucky to be tolerated. You might be dangerous, Dominic Sterling, but at least you're dangerous in my defense. Grace." He said my name like a prayer, like a curse. "Don't make me into your hero. I'm not a good man." The greatest heroes in literature were never good men. They were complicated men who chose to do good things. There's a difference. We moved to the living room after dinner, and he kept his promise. He brought out his brother's copy of the Odyssey and began to teach me, patiently explaining the nuances of ancient Greek, the poetry lost in translation. I sat next to him on the leather couch, our shoulders touching, and learned the language of Homer from the mouth of a mobster. This word here, he pointed to a phrase in Book 5, nostos. It's usually translated as homecoming, but it's deeper than that. It's the ache of returning, the bittersweet knowledge that you can never truly go back to what you left behind. "That's what you feel," I said softly. "Nostos for the person you could have been." He looked at me, and the vulnerability in his eyes was devastating. "How did you know?" "Because I feel it too. For the girl who believed in fairy tales before the world taught her they were lies." He reached out, slowly, giving me time to pull away. When I didn't, he cupped my face in his hand, his thumb brushing my cheekbone. "What if we're each other's nostos, the homecoming we've been searching for?" I leaned into his touch, letting myself want this, want him, for the first time. "Then we'd better make sure we don't lose each other." He kissed me then, soft and careful, like I was something precious, like I mattered. I kissed him back, tasting tiramisu and possibility, feeling his other hand come up to cradle the back of my head, his fingers tangling in my hair. When we broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against mine. "I should tell you," he murmured, "that I'm not good at this, at relationships, at feelings, at being vulnerable. I'll probably mess this up 1,000 different ways." "Then I'll teach you," I whispered back. "The same way you're teaching me Greek. One word at a time, until we're fluent in each other." We fell asleep on the couch, his arms around me, the Odyssey open between us, and I dreamed of ancient heroes and modern monsters and the thin line between the two. The next morning, I woke to find Dominic already dressed, talking quietly on his phone in the kitchen. When he saw me, he smiled and held up a finger. 1 minute. I made coffee in a machine that probably cost more than my car, and listen to him destroy someone's life. I don't care about your excuses, Thomas. The permits are revoked. The investors are pulling out. By noon today, Ashford Construction will be filing for bankruptcy protection. A pause. Your wife humiliated my wife in a church. Did you think there wouldn't be consequences? He hung up, slipped his phone into his pocket, and poured cream in my coffee without asking. Good morning. Sleep well? You bankrupted Robert's family overnight? I took the coffee, noting that it was perfect, exactly how I liked it. I expedited an inevitable outcome. The Ashfords were over-leveraged and poorly managed. I simply accelerated their downfall. He leaned against the counter, watching me with those dark, assessing eyes. Does it bother you? It should. I sipped the coffee, letting the warmth ground me. But honestly, after what they did yesterday, I'm more bothered by how not bothered I am. Welcome to the dark side, Professor Sullivan. We have excellent coffee and questionable morals. We spent the morning at City Hall, getting the marriage license. Dominic had obviously called ahead. We bypassed every line, every bureaucratic hurdle. The clerk who processed our paperwork didn't ask questions, just smiled nervously and congratulated us. Within an hour, we were legally able to marry. When? I asked as we left the building. Dominic's hand on the small of my back, proprietary and protective. When what? When do we actually get married? Sign the papers? Make it official? He stopped walking, turned to face me on the steps of City Hall. Behind him, Chicago rushed by. Cars, people, lives intersecting and diverging like threads in a cosmic loom. Whenever you're ready, tonight, tomorrow, next week, this is your choice, Grace. I thought about my empty apartment, my uncertain career, the humiliation still raw from yesterday. I thought about Dominic's penthouse, his books, the way he'd kissed me like I was the answer to a question he'd been asking his whole life. Tonight, I decided. Let's do it tonight. No guests, no ceremony, just the legal requirement. You and me and the commitment we're choosing. And after? He asked quietly. After we're married, what then? Then we figure it out. Together. I took his hand, felt his fingers close around mine. I'm not naive, Dominic. I know this is crazy. I know the odds are against us. But for the first time in my life, I'm choosing something reckless and wild and possibly destructive. And I'm choosing it with my eyes wide open. I'll try to deserve this, he promised. To deserve you. Don't try to deserve me. Just try to know me. The rest will follow. We got married at midnight in a judge's private chambers, with 2 of Dominic's men as witnesses. I wore a simple white dress from the closet he'd filled. Elegant, understated. Nothing like the elaborate gown I'd worn to the church. He wore a dark suit and an expression of fierce concentration, like he was memorizing every moment. When the judge pronounced us married, Dominic kissed me like he was drowning and I was air. Like I was the home he'd been sailing toward for 20 years. Like Nostos made flesh. Grace Sterling, he whispered against my lips. How does that sound? Like a beginning, I whispered back. Like a chance. We drove back to the penthouse, our home now, in comfortable silence. At the door, he swept me up in his arms, carrying me over the threshold like the tradition demanded. You know, I said, arms around his neck. In the Odyssey, Penelope tests Odysseus when he finally comes home. She asks him to move their marriage bed, which she knows is impossible, because he built it from a living olive tree rooted in the ground. It's how she knows he's really her husband. He remembers the intimate details of their life together. What's your test, Grace? He set me down gently in the living room. How will you know I'm really yours? I looked at him, This dangerous, damaged man who'd crashed my wedding and bankrupted my enemies and taught me Greek by candlelight. When you trust me enough to show me your worst parts and believe I'll stay anyway, that's when I'll know. He pulled me close, buried his face in my hair. What if my worst parts are too dark? What if you run? Then you chase me, I said simply. And you keep chasing until I stop running. That's what heroes do. Dominic. They don't give up on their homecoming. We spent our wedding night talking until dawn, curled together on the couch, learning each other's histories. He told me about his first kill at 16, the nightmares that still haunted him, the weight of being the monster that kept other monsters at bay. I told him about foster homes and hunger and learning to make myself invisible, about the desperate need to belong that had driven me into Robert's arms. "I'm glad I found you," he said as the sun rose over Lake Michigan, "even if I had to steal you from a church to do it." "I'm glad you stole me," I admitted. "Turns out I've been waiting my whole life for someone to think I was worth taking." The reality of being Mrs. Dominic Sterling hit me on Monday morning when I returned to Northwestern to teach my Greek mythology seminar. The department secretary's eyes went wide when she saw me, and within minutes, Professor Matthews was asking me to step into his office. "Grace," he said, closing the door carefully, "there are rumors about your wedding this weekend, about Dominic Sterling. They're not rumors if they're true." I sat in the chair across from his desk, spine straight, channeling every ounce of confidence I didn't quite feel. "I married him Saturday night." Matthews ran a hand through his thinning hair. "Do you understand who he is? What he represents? The university has a reputation to maintain." "The university," I said carefully, "accepts generous donations from the Sterling Foundation every year. Donations that fund 3 scholarships and the Classical Studies Archive, unless those ethics suddenly bother you." He had the grace to look uncomfortable. "That's different." "Is it? Or is it only different because now the connection is visible?" I leaned forward. "I'm the same teacher I was last Friday, Professor Matthews. My qualifications haven't changed. My dedication to my students hasn't changed. The only thing that's changed is my last name. And your safety. Grace, these are dangerous people. These are my people now." I stood, gathering my bag. "I'll understand if the university wants to review my position, but I won't apologize for my marriage, and I won't live in shame for choosing something unexpected." I walked out before he could respond, my heart pounding, and nearly collided with Sophia Sterling in the hallway. She looked up at me with wide eyes, clutching her copy of The Odyssey. "Miss Sullivan, Mrs. Sterling, She flushed. "I heard. About you and my Uncle Dominic. Sophia." I glanced around the empty hallway, then gestured to an alcove by the water fountain. "I want you to know that my relationship with Dominic has nothing to do with our student-teacher relationship. You earned every grade in my class on merit. I know that." She looked down at her shoes. I wanted to say thank you. My uncle has been different since he met you. Lighter. He smiles sometimes. I didn't even know he could smile." My throat tightened. "He's mentioned you. He's very proud of you. He's not supposed to be part of my life. My dad wanted me away from all that." She met my eyes, and I saw Dominic in her face. The same intensity, the same old soul in a young body. "But I'm glad he found you. Maybe you can be the bridge between the family he is and the man he wants to be." She walked away before I could respond, leaving me standing in the alcove, realizing that this marriage wasn't just about Dominic and me. It was about everyone connected to us, everyone affected by the choices we made. My seminar was surreal. Students who'd never spoken up suddenly had questions about Greek marriage customs, about Penelope's agency in the Odyssey, about whether love could exist in arrangements of convenience. I answered each question professionally, aware that every word would be dissected later in the student union. Professor Sterling, one student, Marcus Chen, brilliant and insufferably confident, asked at the end, "Do you think Penelope really loved Odysseus? Or was she just trapped by circumstance?" "I think," I said carefully, "that love isn't always about grand gestures or immediate passion. Sometimes love is choosing to stay when leaving would be easier. It's building trust day by day. It's seeing someone's flaws and deciding they're worth the complication." I met his eyes. Penelope could have remarried. She had dozens of suitors. But she chose to wait, to hope, to believe that her husband would find his way home. That's not weakness. That's strength. After class, I found a gift on my desk. A first edition of Edith Hamilton's Mythology, the pages pristine, worth more than my semester salary. The card read simply, "For your office. You'll need better books now that you're a Sterling. D." I pressed the card to my chest and allowed myself a moment of pure joy. That evening I came home, and when had I started thinking of Dominic's penthouse as home? To find him in the kitchen, attempting to cook. The result was ambitious. Smoke detector going off, pasta boiling over, some kind of sauce that looked more like crime scene evidence than marinara. "What are you doing?" I asked, torn between laughter and horror. "Trying to make dinner." He turned off the stove, looking adorably frustrated. "I've negotiated with foreign diplomats, orchestrated hostile takeovers, and eliminated threats across 3 states. But apparently, I can't boil pasta without causing a disaster." I moved to the stove, assessed the damage. "When's the last time you cooked for yourself?" "Define cooked." He leaned against the counter, watching me salvage what I could. "I can order from 5-star restaurants. Does that count?" "No." I dumped the pasta, started fresh water. "Cooking is intimate. It's caring for someone by feeding them. It's worth learning." "Then teach me." He came up behind me, his hands settling on my hips, his chin resting on my shoulder. "Teach me how to care for you properly." We cooked together, his hands over mine as I showed him how to test pasta for doneness, how to season sauce by taste rather than measurement. He was a quick study, intense and focused, asking questions like cooking was a language he needed to master. "Why is this important to you?" he asked as we sat down to eat pasta that was actually edible. Teaching me domestic things. "Because your whole life is about power and control and managing threats. But a marriage can't survive on that. We need ordinary moments, shared rituals, the intimacy of everyday life." I twirled pasta on my fork. "Plus, I refuse to eat takeout every night for the rest of my life." He smiled. "Noted. What else do you refuse?" "I refuse to be decorative. I refuse to quit my job. I refuse to become someone I'm not just because I married into money and power." I met his eyes. "What do you refuse?" "I refuse to let you get hurt because of me. I refuse to hide who I am, but I'll shield you from the worst of it. I refuse to become my father, who loved his empire more than his family." He reached across the table, took my hand, and I refused to waste this second chance at being human. We cleaned up together, and he told me about his day, meetings with legitimate business partners, a charity board he sat on for appearances, and then, more quietly, about a territorial dispute with a rival family that was escalating. "How do you handle it?" I asked, drying dishes that probably cost more than my car. "The violence, the moral ambiguity. I compartmentalize. The man who negotiates drug territories isn't the man standing in this kitchen with you. They exist separately. He put away the last plate. But lately, the walls between those identities are thinning. You're bleeding through into all my compartments. Is that a bad thing? It's a dangerous thing. Men who rule my world can't afford to care too much. Caring creates vulnerabilities. He pulled me close, his forehead resting against mine. But I'm starting to think that maybe vulnerabilities are worth it if they come with you. Later, in bed, we'd graduated to sharing a room, though he kept a respectful distance. I lay awake listening to him breathe. His back was covered in scars I'd glimpsed but never asked about. His sleep was restless, punctuated by nightmares he never discussed. "Dominic," I whispered, "are you awake?" "Always, when you're near." His voice was rough with sleep. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. I want you to know that I see you. All of you. The parts you think are too dark, too damaged. And I'm still here." He turned to face me, and even in the darkness, I could see the shine of tears in his eyes. "Grace, I've done terrible things. Things that would make you hate me if you knew the details." "Then tell me. Not tonight. Not until you're ready. But eventually, tell me everything. Because I meant what I said at the wedding. Your worst parts don't scare me away. They just make me want to understand you better." He pulled me against his chest, holding me like I was his anchor in a storm. "You're too good for this life. I'm exactly right for this life. I just approach it differently." I pressed a kiss to his collarbone. "Now sleep. Tomorrow I'm teaching you how to make breakfast. You're really committed to this domestic reformation, aren't you? Someone has to civilize you. Might as well be your wife." The next few weeks fell into a rhythm. I taught classes, graded papers, and slowly integrated into Dominic's world. I met his legitimate business partners at charity galas, where I wore designer gowns and smiled for cameras. I learned to navigate society wives who were fascinated and horrified by me in equal measure. I became visible in a way I'd never been before, both thrilling and terrifying. But the real integration happened in private moments. Teaching him to cook Sunday breakfast, reading Greek together in the evenings, learning the scars on his body and the stories they told. Watching him learn to be gentle, to be vulnerable, to be something other than the king of the North Side. 3 weeks after our midnight wedding, I was grading papers in the living room when Dominic came home early, his face tight with controlled rage. Blood spattered his shirt sleeve. "What happened?" I set aside my papers. "Business." He started toward the bedroom, then stopped. "You don't need to know the details." "Dominic." I followed him. "I'm your wife. I chose this life with eyes open. Don't start hiding things now because you think I'm too delicate." He turned, and the look in his eyes was pure danger. "Grace, I just killed a man. Shot him in the head because he put hands on one of my dealers. There are no clean versions of this story. There's no way to make it palatable." I took a breath, steadied myself. Did he deserve it? Does anyone deserve death? Who am I to play God? He laughed bitterly. "But by the laws of my world, yes. He broke protocol. He endangered my people. So I eliminated the threat. Then go shower, change your clothes, and then come have dinner with me, and we'll talk about my terrible student essays and your Greek pronunciation, and we'll be normal for a few hours." I reached up, cupped his face. "You're allowed to be both men, Dominic, the king and the husband. I can hold space for both." He kissed me then, deep and desperate, tasting like violence and need. When he pulled back, his eyes were wet. "How are you real?" "I'm real because you made me real. You gave me permission to be brave." I smiled. "Now go shower. You're getting blood on my favorite rug." That night, we crossed a threshold. After dinner, after Greek lessons, after he'd finally relaxed, I took his hand and led him to our bedroom. We'd been sleeping beside each other for weeks, careful and chaste, letting trust build. "Grace," he said carefully, "we don't have to. I want to." I turned to face him. "I want you, not because I feel obligated, but because I choose this. I choose you. All of you." He undressed me slowly, reverently, like I was something holy. His touch was gentle despite the violence in his past, his kisses soft, despite the blood he'd spilled hours before. And when we finally came together, it was with a tenderness that made me cry. "Why are you crying?" he whispered, still moving inside me, his forehead pressed to mine. "Because I've never felt this safe," I whispered back. "Never felt this wanted, this whole." Afterward, we lay tangled together, and he traced patterns on my skin. "I love you," he said quietly. "I know it's too soon, and I know you didn't ask for declarations, but I need you to know, in case something happens to me, in case this life catches up. I need you to know that you changed everything." "I love you too," I admitted, "and nothing's going to happen to you because I won't allow it. I didn't survive foster care and academia and wedding day humiliation just to lose you to your dangerous life." He laughed, the sound full of wonder. "You're going to be the death of me, Grace Sterling. Or the life of you," I corrected. "Nostos, remember? I'm your homecoming." The Ashford family didn't go quietly into bankruptcy. 2 months into my marriage to Dominic, Robert called my office phone. I stared at his name on the caller ID for 3 rings before answering. "Grace." His voice was strained, desperate. "Please, I need to talk to you." "We have nothing to discuss, Robert. My family is being destroyed. My father's company is finished. My mother's society friends won't return her calls. Victoria had to move back home because she can't afford her apartment anymore." A pause. "This is your husband's doing. This is consequences." I leaned back in my office chair, surprised by how little I felt. "You let your mother humiliate me in front of everyone we knew. You said nothing while she called me a gold digger and accused me of trapping you. What did you think would happen?" "I thought you'd understand. My mother was protecting our family." "From what? From me?" I laughed, sharp and bitter. "I was never a threat, Robert. I was a woman who loved you, who would have made your family stronger if you'd let her. But you were too weak to stand up for me, and now you're too weak to accept responsibility for that choice. Grace, please. If you ever cared about me, call him off. Tell Dominic Sterling to leave my family alone." "Why would I do that?" "Because you're a good person. Because mercy is what separates us from people like him." I was quiet for a long moment, thinking about Dominic teaching me Greek by candlelight. Dominic learning to cook breakfast because it mattered to me. Dominic holding me through nightmares about being abandoned. Dominic, who'd shown me more genuine care in 2 months than Robert had in 2 years. "You're right," I said finally. "I am a good person. That's why I'm going to give you advice that might save what's left of your dignity. Stop blaming your failures on other people. Take responsibility for the company's poor management, your mother's cruelty, and your own cowardice. Rebuild your life without scapegoats. And never, ever contact me again." I hung up while he was still talking. That evening, I told Dominic about the call. He listened quietly, his expression unreadable, while I relayed the conversation. "Do you want me to stop?" he asked when I finished. "Let up on the Ashfords? Do you want to stop?" "I want whatever makes you happy, Grace. If destroying them no longer serves you, I'll redirect my attention elsewhere." I considered this. The old Grace, the one who'd worn her grandmother's altered dress and apologized for existing, would have said yes. Would have chosen mercy, chosen to be the bigger person, chosen to prove she wasn't vindictive. but I wasn't that woman anymore. "Keep going," I said. "Not out of cruelty, but out of justice. They need to understand that actions have consequences, that you can't treat people as disposable without eventually paying a price." Dominic pulled me into his lap, his arms secure around my waist. "You're becoming ruthless, Mrs. Sterling. Should I be concerned? You should be proud. You married a literature professor and got a queen in the making." I kissed him softly. "Besides, you've been teaching me Greek. Consider this my education in your other native language. Power." "Careful," he murmured against my lips. "I might fall even more in love with you. Too late for warnings. You're already in over your head." The real confrontation came a week later, when Caroline Ashford showed up at Northwestern. She waited outside my seminar, dressed impeccably despite her family's financial collapse, her face a mask of controlled fury. "You," she said when my students had filed out, when it was just us in the hallway. "You did this." "I did nothing. I simply married someone who values me more than you ever did." "You married a criminal, a thug who threatens legitimate businessmen and destroys families for sport." I closed my classroom door, turned to face her fully. "Dominic Sterling is many things, Mrs. Ashford, but he's never made me feel small. He's never humiliated me in public. He's never stood by while someone I loved was attacked." I stepped closer. "You want to know the difference between your family and him? He's honest about what he is. You hide behind respectability and social status while being just as cruel, just as destructive. At least he owns his darkness." "We would have accepted you eventually," Caroline said, and for the first time, I heard desperation in her voice. "If you'd been patient, if you'd proved yourself, I shouldn't have had to prove myself. I should have been welcomed because your son loved me, because I was kind and educated, and would have been loyal to your family." My voice cracked, surprising us both. "But you couldn't see past my lack of pedigree. You couldn't imagine that I might have value beyond my bank account or family connections. So you destroyed something that could have been beautiful, and now you're paying the price." "Please," Caroline whispered. "My husband is talking about suicide. Victoria is having panic attacks. Robert hasn't left his apartment in days. We've lost everything." I felt something twist in my chest. Not quite sympathy, but recognition of shared humanity. "Then rebuild. You're educated, connected, capable. Build something new that isn't based on looking down on others. Learn humility. Discover empathy. Become better people than you were." "And your husband? Will he allow us to rebuild?" "That depends on whether you've learned your lesson, whether you understand that cruelty has consequences." I gathered my bag, prepared to leave. "Stay away from me, Mrs. Ashford. Stay away from my husband. Focus on salvaging what you can of your family, and pray that Dominic decides you've suffered enough." I walked past her, down the hallway, out into Chicago's autumn sunshine. My hands were shaking, adrenaline flooding my system. I called Dominic from the parking lot. "Caroline Ashford was here," I said when he answered. "At the university." "What?" His voice went cold, dangerous. "Did she threaten you?" "No," she begged. "Asked me to call you off." I leaned against my car, suddenly exhausted. "Dominic, I think they've learned their lesson. I think maybe it's enough." Silence on the other end, then quietly, "Are you sure? Because I can keep going. I can make sure they never forget what they did to you." "I'm sure. Not because I forgive them, but because continuing feels like we're letting them control us. They don't deserve that power anymore." "Then it's done. As of today, the Ashfords get to start rebuilding. They'll never be what they were, but they won't be destroyed completely." A pause. "You're too merciful, Grace. And you're too protective. Together, maybe we balance out." That night, Dominic took me to dinner at an exclusive restaurant where the maitre d' knew him by name, and fear flickered in people's eyes when they recognized him. We sat in a private room overlooking the river, and he held my hand across the table. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for calling off the war, for knowing when enough is enough. I would have kept going forever if you hadn't stopped me. That's what partners do. They balance each other. Your darkness and my light, your vengeance and my mercy." I smiled. "Plus, I have better uses for your time than destroying the Ashfords, like teaching me more Greek and learning to make lasagna. Always with the cooking lessons." But he was smiling. "What happened to the woman who showed up at my door 2 months ago in a wedding dress, terrified and desperate? She learned that sometimes being saved isn't about being weak. Sometimes it's about being brave enough to accept help, to take the hand being offered and trust where it leads." I squeezed his fingers. "You saved me that day, Dominic. Not from Robert or his family, but from a life of making myself smaller, from apologizing for existing. You gave me permission to be powerful." "You gave yourself permission. I just provided the opportunity." We were finishing dessert when one of Dominic's men appeared in the doorway, his face grave. Dominic's expression shifted instantly, from tender husband to dangerous kingpin. "Problem?" he asked quietly. "The Moretti family. They've made a move on the north side. 3 of our dealers are missing." Dominic's jaw tightened. "When?" "Within the last 2 hours." I watched my husband transform. His eyes went cold, his posture shifted, his entire energy changed from protective to predatory. This was the man who ruled Chicago's underworld, and seeing him like this should have terrified me. Instead, I felt a strange sense of pride. "Go," I said, standing. "Do what you need to do. I'll get a car home." "Grace, I'm not naive about what you do, Dominic. I'm not going to fall apart every time your work intrudes on dinner. Go handle your business. Come home safe." I kissed him, hard and possessive. "And remember that you have someone waiting who loves you. Don't take unnecessary risks." He cupped my face, his thumb brushing my cheekbone. "How did I get so lucky?" "You crashed a wedding and stole a bride. That takes a special kind of audacity." I smiled. "Now go. Your empire awaits." I watched him leave, flanked by his men, moving with lethal grace. Then I called for a car and went home to our penthouse, to the life we were building together. He came home at 3 a.m, bloody and exhausted. I was awake, reading the Odyssey in the original Greek, practicing the pronunciations he'd taught me. When I heard the door, I set down the book and went to him. "How bad?" I asked, helping him out of his jacket. 2 of our dealers are dead. The 3rd we recovered. The Morettis won't be a problem anymore." He said it flatly, and I could see the weight of it in his eyes, the cost of being who he was. I led him to the shower, helped him wash away the blood and violence. I didn't ask for details, didn't demand explanations. I just cared for him, this complicated man who'd chosen me, who'd given me a kingdom, and asked only for my companionship in return. In bed, he held me tight, his face buried in my hair. "I killed 3 men tonight," he whispered. "Shot them without hesitation, without remorse. What does that make me?" "Human," I whispered back. "Flawed and complex, and trying to survive in a world that doesn't allow for gentleness. You're not defined by your worst moments, Dominic. You're defined by what you do after them, by who you choose to be when you come home." "And who am I when I come home?" "Mine," I said simply. "You're mine, and I'm yours, and nothing that happens out there changes what we are in here." He kissed me then, desperate and searching, and we made love with an urgency born of mortality and fear. Afterward, he finally slept, and I watched the sun rise over Lake Michigan, thinking about heroes and monsters, and the men who are somehow both. 6 months after Dominic Sterling crashed my wedding and declared me his bride, I stood in front of Northwestern's Board of Trustees defending my position. The meeting had been called because of concerns about faculty conduct and appropriate associations. Translation: they were uncomfortable with a professor married to a known criminal, regardless of how much money his foundation donated. Dr. Sterling, the board chair, a severe woman named Patricia Hendricks, said with barely concealed disdain, "Your academic record is exemplary. Your student evaluations are consistently outstanding. However, the university must consider its reputation and the safety of its students." "Has my marriage affected my teaching?" I asked calmly. "Have my students complained? Has my research suffered?" "That's not the point. That's exactly the point." I stood, placing my hands on the conference table. "You're suggesting I should be punished for my private life despite maintaining professional excellence. You're telling me that a woman's career should be contingent on her husband's occupation. Do you apply the same standard to male faculty?" "Because Professor Walsh's wife works for a pharmaceutical company currently under federal investigation, and I don't see him being called before this board." Patricia's face flushed. "This is different. It's only different because you're afraid of Dominic Sterling's reputation. But let me be very clear. My husband has never interfered with my work. He has never threatened anyone at this university. He has never done anything except support my career unconditionally." I met each board member's eyes. "If you terminate my employment based on my marriage, you're opening yourselves to a discrimination lawsuit that will make national headlines. And unlike Robert Ashford's family, I now have the resources to fight." Professor Matthews, who'd been silent until now, spoke up. "Perhaps we're being hasty. Dr. Sterling has done nothing wrong. She's an asset to this department and university." It took another hour of deliberation, but ultimately the board agreed I could keep my position. As I left the meeting, Patricia caught up with me in the hallway. "You've changed," she observed. 6 months ago, you would have apologized and resigned. 6 months ago, I thought making myself smaller would keep me safe. Now I know that safety comes from taking up space, from refusing to apologize for existing." I smiled. My husband taught me that, among other things. That evening, I came home to find Dominic in the kitchen, actually cooking dinner. Properly cooking, not burning. He'd been practicing in secret, wanting to surprise me. "Chicken marsala," he announced proudly, presenting a plate that looked genuinely edible. "I followed your instructions exactly. I tasted it, letting the flavors settle. It was good, really good. You've been practicing without me. I wanted to be able to care for you the way you care for me." He sat across from me, watching anxiously for my reaction. "Is it okay?" "It's perfect." I reached across the table for his hand. "The board tried to fire me today." His expression darkened instantly. "What?" "They were concerned about my association with you, but I fought back, and I won. Used the resources you've given me to defend myself." I squeezed his fingers. "Thank you for that. For teaching me that I'm allowed to be powerful." "Grace, if my reputation is damaging your career." "Your reputation is irrelevant to my career. My work speaks for itself. Today just proved that I'm finally brave enough to let it." I smiled. "Besides, being married to the King of the North Side has advantages, like board members being too scared to cross me." He laughed, that genuine sound that I'd grown to love. "You're terrifying when you want to be." I learned from the best. We were finishing dinner when Sophia showed up, unannounced, her face tear-streaked. Dominic immediately went to her, gentle in a way that still surprised me even after 6 months. "What's wrong, Piccola?" he asked, leading her to the couch. "The girls at school found out, about you being my uncle, about what you do." She looked at me desperately. They're saying horrible things, that my family is criminals, that I don't belong at Northwestern Prep. I sat beside her, taking her hand. Do you remember what we talked about in class? About Telemachus? She nodded, sniffling. Telemachus was the son of Odysseus, the great hero. But for the first 20 years of his life, everyone treated him like he was nobody. Just a boy whose father had abandoned him. They tried to steal his inheritance, marry his mother, take everything his family had built. I brushed tears from her cheek. But Telemachus didn't let their opinions define him. He went on his own journey. He became his own hero. And when his father finally came home, Telemachus fought beside him as an equal. You're saying I should be proud of Uncle Dominic? Sophia asked quietly. I'm saying you should be proud of yourself. Your uncle loves you enough to stay away from your life, to protect you from his world. That's sacrifice. That's love. I glanced at Dominic, whose eyes were suspiciously bright. And the girls who are judging you? They're like the suitors in the Odyssey. Small-minded people who can only see power and reputation, who miss the humanity underneath. Sophia threw her arms around me, sobbing. I'm so glad he found you. I'm so glad you're my aunt now. Over her head, Dominic mouthed, I love you. I mouthed back, I know. We kept Sophia for dinner, and she told us about school, about her own writing. She wanted to be a novelist. Dominic listened with fierce attention, asking questions, encouraging her dreams. Watching him with his niece, I saw the man he could have been, the gentleness that survived despite everything. After she left, Dominic pulled me into his arms. You're good with her. Natural. She's a special kid, smart, creative, sensitive. She just needs people who see her potential. Like someone else I know. He kissed my forehead. Grace, I need to tell you something. About my brother. About the night he died. We sat on the couch, and he told me everything. How Michael had been working with federal prosecutors, building a case against corrupt police officers who were taking bribes from rival crime families. How someone had found out, had arranged the accident. How Dominic had spent 2 years hunting down everyone responsible, eliminating them one by one. The last man died 3 weeks ago, he said quietly. A police captain. I made it look like a heart attack. His family will never know the truth. Will never have to carry the shame of his corruption. Do you feel better? I asked. Now that they're all gone? No, Michael is still dead. Sophia still grew up without her father. Justice doesn't bring back what we've lost. He looked at me with hollow eyes. All it does is make sure the scales balance. I held him while he cried for the first time since I'd known him. Held him while he grieved the brother he'd lost, the innocence that had died with him, the weight of being the last Sterling carrying the family's dark legacy. I want out, he whispered against my shoulder. Not completely. I can never be completely out. But I want to transition the legitimate businesses, phase out the illegal operations. I want to be someone Sophia can be proud of. Someone you don't have to defend to university boards. I'll defend you anywhere, Dominic. Boardrooms, courtrooms, the streets of Chicago, wherever you need me. I pulled back to look at him. But if you want to change, I'll support that too. We'll figure it out together. Over the next 3 months, Dominic began the complex process of reorganizing his empire. He brought in legitimate business managers, started divesting from illegal operations, increased his charitable work. It was slow, dangerous work, the kind that made enemies in both legal and criminal worlds. There were threats, attempts at intimidation. One terrifying week where someone left a dead rat on my office doorstep with a note. Tell your husband to stop, or you're next. Dominic wanted to lock me away, surround me with security. Instead, I hired one bodyguard, continued teaching, and refused to live in fear. If I hide, I told him firmly, they win. If I change my life because of threats, then we're giving them power over us. I won't do that. Grace, if something happens to you, then you'll grieve and you'll heal, and you'll remember that I chose this life freely, that I walked into it with eyes open and no regrets. I cupped his face. Stop trying to protect me from consequences I've already accepted. Let me be brave on my own terms. The breaking point came on our first anniversary. Dominic had planned an elaborate dinner at the restaurant where we'd had our first meal as a married couple. I wore a dress he'd bought me, emerald green, elegant, expensive. He wore a suit that made him look dangerous and sophisticated in mine. We were in the car when the shooting started. Bullets shattered the rear window, and suddenly Dominic was on top of me, shielding me with his body. The driver accelerated, swerving through traffic while more shots rang out. I felt Dominic flinch, felt warm blood seeping through his shirt onto my dress. "Dominic!" I screamed. "I'm fine. Stay down." The car screeched to a stop at a hospital emergency entrance. Dominic's men materialized from nowhere, creating a protective circle while we got him inside. The bullet had grazed his shoulder, painful but not life-threatening. While doctors cleaned and bandaged the wound, I sat in the waiting room, my emerald dress ruined with my husband's blood, and I made a decision. When they finally let me see him, I walked into his room with my spine straight and my resolve firm. "This ends now," I said without preamble. "Not your businesses, not your transition. This war, this constant threat, this life where we can't have dinner without risking death." "Grace, I'm not finished." I moved to his bedside. "You want it out. You've been working toward out. But you're trying to do it slowly, carefully, diplomatically. Meanwhile, we're being shot at on our anniversary. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to call a meeting with every family, every power player, everyone who matters in your world. And you're going to tell them that Dominic Sterling is retiring from the game, that you're keeping your legitimate businesses and selling everything else to the highest bidder. No favorites, no grudges, clean break. It's not that simple. It is that simple. The complexity is fear. Fear that someone will see it as weakness, that someone will strike while you're transitioning. But you know what? Let them strike. Let them come for you. Because you're Dominic Sterling, and even in retirement, you're more dangerous than they'll ever be. I took his hand, careful of his injured shoulder. And because you're not alone anymore, you have me. You have Sophia. You have a life worth protecting that doesn't involve gun battles and blood feuds. He stared at me, and I saw something shift in his expression. You're serious. Completely. Call the meeting. End this chapter. Start the next one. I smiled. Or did you think you married a woman who'd be content watching you bleed in the back of a car for the rest of our lives? I love you, he said, wonder in his voice. God, I love you. Then love me enough to choose life. Choose us. Choose the future instead of the past. The church burned beautifully. St. Michael's Cathedral, where Caroline Ashford had humiliated me, where Robert had stood silent while his family destroyed me, where my old life had ended in shame. It burned like a funeral pyre for everything I used to be. You really burned down a church? I asked, watching flames dance in Dominic's dark eyes. Technically, the insurance will call it faulty wiring, and technically it had been deconsecrated last year for renovations. He pulled me closer, both of us standing in the parking lot of what would soon be ash. But yes, I burned down the church where my wife was insulted. Is that too much? It's absolutely too much. I kissed him, and I love you for it. We'd gotten married again that night, 3 a.m. in an ancient library downtown, surrounded by books that had witnessed more history than we could imagine. Dominic had arranged everything: a judge, witnesses, a violinist playing Baroque music among the stacks. My dress had been simple white silk. His suit had been black. And when he'd placed a ring on my finger, a ring with diamonds he'd stolen from Robert Ashford's family safe during the bankruptcy proceedings, I'd laughed until I cried. Something borrowed, something blue, something stolen from your ex-fiancé? I'd asked. I prefer to think of it as redistributed wealth. He'd kissed my hand, reverent. You married me in a judge's chambers the first time. I wanted to give you something memorable for the second. Second time's the charm, second time's the truth. First time was rescue. This time is choice. Pure, informed, eyes wide open choice. Now, a week later, we stood watching the church burn, and I thought about the year behind us. The Ashfords were rebuilding their lives, humbled but not destroyed. Dominic had successfully transitioned most of his empire, keeping only the legitimate businesses and a few strategic alliances for protection. I'd been promoted to associate professor and published a paper on marriage contracts in Homeric epic that had gotten surprising attention. Sophia was thriving, writing a novel about a girl who discovers her uncle is secretly protecting her from monsters, both literal and metaphorical. She'd asked to interview both of us for research. We'd told her edited versions of our story, enough truth to be useful without traumatizing a 14-year-old. Think we'll survive? I asked, leaning against my husband's chest. Marriage, I mean. The real kind, not the convenience kind. I think we'll do more than survive. His arms tightened around me. I think we'll build something that makes myths look like rough drafts. A love story that starts with revenge and church burning and ends with two people who choose each other every single day. That's very romantic for a retired crime lord. That's very sarcastic for a literature professor. We watched the last of the church collapse, and I thought about Nostos, that aching Greek word for homecoming that Dominic had taught me our first night together. We'd both found our way home, not to places, but to each other. I was his Penelope, he was my Odysseus, and our story was messy and complicated and absolutely ours. Ready to go home? He asked as fire trucks finally arrived, as dawn began to break over Chicago. Always, I said, as long as home is wherever you are. We drove back to our penthouse, to our life of teaching Greek and cooking meals and building a future that neither of us had expected. And if sometimes Dominic still handled problems with methods that weren't entirely legal, and if sometimes I encouraged him because some people really did deserve consequences, well, that was between us and the gods. After all, the greatest love stories in literature were never about perfect people. They were about complicated people choosing to be better versions of themselves, together. And we were writing our own epic, one day at a time.